Well, colleagues at CNA Digital have also looked into this phenomenon of companies relocating out of China to other countries apart from Vietnam across Southeast Asia to avoid U.S. tariffs against Beijing. Now, there is also concern that levies may be imposed by Washington against firms who make that shift. Well, joining us now, we have Amir Yusof from CNA Digital. He is the lead writer of that report, as well as our CNA TV's Shenzhen correspondent, Deborah Wong. Now, Amir is joining us from Johor Bahru, and Deborah is in Hong Kong. Well, let's just start things off with you first, Amir. We just saw from that story that companies are flocking to Vietnam because of this US-China trade war, and you have written about it extensively. Your research also covered other Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia, and you've sort of come to that conclusion that whether it's Harris or Trump, it does not change the tide. Why is that?
Yes, indeed, Oteli. So Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia have benefited from this China plus one strategy. It's a policy Beijing has put in place to diversify their supply chains and avoid US tariffs on goods from China. So this has given a rise to the phenomenon of Southeast Asia washing, a phenomenon of Chinese companies trying to disguise the origin of their products by relocating operations to countries in the region. Now, the US has started to become aware of this and started imposing tariffs. For instance, they imposed duties on solar imports from these countries in October. Analysts I spoke to said both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are likely to continue imposing tariffs on these countries, but they stress that under a Trump administration, measures are likely to be even more aggressive because Trump is obsessed with imposing tariffs, especially on countries with whom the US has a trade deficit.
Amir, Southeast Asia washing, that's a really interesting topic to discuss. I want to bring you in now, Deborah, because yesterday we actually just talked about some of the alternatives that companies in China have been looking at. Amir and his colleagues in their story have also focused quite a bit on the solar industry in Malaysia as well as its challenges. But I'm curious to know from China's perspective, Deborah, how do authorities or companies see these moves? I mean, what is the thinking behind their strategy?
Well, observers have called this entire phenomenon a huge cat and mouse game. You know, when one export hub experiences challenges in one area, another one pops up elsewhere. And if we were to use the same example of Chinese solar panel firms that Amir brought up in his story, we see them starting to explore alternative places like in Laos and Indonesia. So Chinese companies, they want to keep supplying to the lucrative US market. So the shift in production has been quite quick. You know, in August, solar exports from Indonesia to the US actually doubled, whereas in export shipments from Laos to the US, it went up 7 times from its entire 2023 figure. So that really shows that Chinese companies are keen to portray the image that it wants to maintain business as usual. And Chinese authorities, on the other hand, they know that there's an urgent need to diversify. In fact, it's urged Chinese EV makers to go global, to set up manufacturing bases to circumvent US tariffs. And on the broader front, this is really reflective of China's desire to deepen ties with the global south. You know, we're seeing it continue to deepen investments, infrastructure investments in developing countries like in Indonesia. In fact, President Xi Jinping will be meeting the newly minted Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto in a few days. And leaders will also be meeting the Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim sometime this week. So it's really all part of China's push to build and strengthen international alliances, especially as it tries to fend off tensions from the West. So that's what Chinese companies are hoping to achieve. That's what China's hoping to achieve. My question now for Amir is, you know, we've seen in your report that it's not smooth sailing for the Chinese companies based there. What's your take on it?
Yes, Deborah, it's really been a rough ride, especially recently. In Malaysia, there are already reports of Chinese solar plants halting operations, stalling expansion plans. A local official at one industrial facility in Kedah told us that Chinese solar firm Ryzen Technology has already reduced production output by ceasing one line of production. Jinko Solar, a major player here, has shut its Penang facility and retrenched workers there. So there are concerns also over spillover effects into the other industries like semiconductor and also data centers, 2 areas which has perhaps seen a lot of growth in Malaysia recently. So if more tariffs are implemented, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars lost investments to Malaysia's economy and thousands of jobs lost.
Right, certainly it's been a bumpy ride for these firms from the sound of it. Well, we know that the Malaysian Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, he's in China this week, and I'm just wondering if you think this issue would come up. What's your take on it? Let's start with you, Deborah, and then Amir.
Well, I think it could come up, especially since just in September we saw Chinese President Xi Jinping. He had a meeting with Malaysia's King Sultan Ibrahim, and during that meeting they actually talked about a deepening collaboration on high-tech modernization. So whether that could come in a form of state funds to support these struggling companies, we don't know yet. But what's for certain is that China recognizes that Malaysia is a key partner in its Belt and Road initiative. In fact, there could be plans for Malaysia's East Coast Rail Link project to connect to a pan-Asian rail network that could go all the way to China. So both countries are this year marking 50 years of diplomatic ties, and Malaysia will also ASEAN next year. And China does need a friendly face in its corner, especially as it continues to navigate the very complex South China Sea issue. Amir.
Yes, I agree with Deborah. I think there's a good chance the two leaders will discuss this issue. The Malaysian government told us last week that they're negotiating the US Commerce Department for more time and to lend support to Chinese companies in Malaysia. So this issue is clearly among Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's priority. PM Anwar might look to President Xi to smoothen things out with Washington and hopefully achieve a win-win outcome for both Beijing and Putrajaya with regards to this issue. Beyond this, Prime Minister Anwar is also likely to invite President Xi to attend the ASEAN summit next year, as China continues to be an important partner for ASEAN.
All right, we'll be looking out for that. Thank you so very much. CNA Digital's Amir, Yusof, and our correspondent Deborah Wong in Hong Kong.